After 10 years of marriage, my husband left me for a billionaire's daughter. I used to think the cruelest part of that sentence was the betrayal itself. I thought the part that would haunt me forever was picturing Daniel packing his watch case, his tailored shirts, and the easy smile he always wore when he was about to do something selfish, then walking out of our apartment and into a brighter, richer life with someone younger, prettier, and infinitely more connected than I had ever been. I was wrong. The cruelest part was what came after. It was sitting at my kitchen table with my 6-year-old son asleep in the next room, looking at the rent, noticed the school invoice, the electric bill, and the balance left in my account, and realizing heartbreak was a luxury. People with money got to grieve. People like me had to keep moving before the lights went out. Daniel had structured our life in ways I had been too trusting to notice while we were still married. The apartment lease had been shifted. Most of the savings were in accounts I could not touch. By the time the legal fees were done chewing through what little I had, I was left with a few boxes, a car that needed work, and a child who still believed his mother could fix anything. One morning while I was trying to stretch grocery money into another week, my son came into the kitchen in his socks, hair sticking up on one side, holding his backpack by one strap. He looked at the papers on the table, then at me. "Mom, I still go to school next month, right?" I smiled before the fear could reach my face. "Of course you do." He nodded, satisfied, and wandered off to find his crayons. I sat there for a moment after he left, staring at that school invoice until the numbers blurred. That was the morning I understood something simple and ugly. Pride was expensive. Dignity did not pay tuition. And if I wanted my son to keep living like his world was still steady, I was going to have to do whatever it took. That afternoon I found the job posting. Live-in caregiver needed. Private estate. Excellent compensation. Experience preferred. Patient is an elderly male with severe behavioral instability. Position requires discretion, patience, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. It read less like an opportunity and more like a warning. Still, I clicked. The compensation was higher than anything else I had seen in weeks. High enough to cover rent. High enough to keep my son in school. High enough to make me stop asking whether the job sounded safe and start asking whether I could survive it. I sent my application that night. 2 days later, after a short call with a woman who introduced herself only as Vivian, I was driving through iron gates tall enough to block out half the sky. The estate sat far back from the road behind a long stone drive lined with trimmed hedges and cold white lights. The house itself was enormous, the kind of place built less to feel lived in than to remind visitors how small they were. It did not look warm, it looked guarded. I parked, smoothed my blouse, and stepped out with the strange feeling that I was crossing into a place where the rules would not belong to me. The front door opened before I knocked. Vivian Hensley stood there in a cream blouse and dark trousers, one hand on the door, the other relaxed at her side. She was beautiful in the polished, expensive way magazines trained the world to admire. Perfect posture, perfect skin, perfectly controlled expression. She looked like someone who had never had to wonder whether her card would be declined. "You made good time," she said. Her voice was calm, low, and almost kind. "Almost. Traffic was light," I said. She stepped aside. "Come in." The foyer alone was bigger than my first apartment with Daniel. Marble floors, tall ceilings, walls covered in quiet money. Not flashy, worse than flashy, certain. As Vivian led me down the hall, I noticed things that did not fit the gracious estate fantasy. Cameras placed higher than decoration would require. Cabinets with discreet locks. A medicine cart tucked behind a paneled door. Staff moving quickly and speaking very little. Everything felt organized around containment. Not comfort, not care, containment. "Before we meet, my father," Vivian said, "you should understand. This position tends to overwhelm people." I kept walking beside her. "I need work, not comfort." Something shifted in her mouth. Not a smile. Recognition, maybe. "My father was once one of the most powerful men in private finance in this state," she said. "Over the last year, his condition has deteriorated. He can be verbally aggressive, at times physical. He refuses treatment one day and demands it the next. Several caregivers have left within a week. If she meant to scare me off, it was too late. Fear only works on people who have options. I will do what I can," I said. She stopped in front of a pair of carved wooden doors. "I hope so," she replied. "Truly." Then she opened them. Arthur Hensley sat near the window in a wheelchair, a blanket over his legs, one hand resting on the armrest. His hair was silver and untidy. His shoulders looked thinner than they should have. But his eyes were not weak. They were sharp in flashes like light catching on broken glass. The moment he saw me, his face hardened. "Who is this?" His voice cracked through the room like something old and angry tearing open. Vivian did not flinch. "This is Elena, your new caregiver." "No." Arthur slapped the armrest with the flat of his hand. I said, "No more strangers in this room." He reached toward the side table, grabbed a hardback book, and hurled it toward the wall. It struck with a heavy thud and dropped to the floor. I did not move. Vivian sighed the way someone might sigh at bad weather. "You see what I meant," she said. Arthur glared at both of us. "Get out." Both of you. I kept my voice low. I am not here to fight you, Mr. Hensley. I am here to help where I can. He looked at me in a way that made me think for a second that he had heard something in my voice that interested him. Then he said, and your job is what exactly? To stand there and wait until I become whoever they need me to be. The line was strange enough that it sat in the room after he said it. Vivian broke the silence. I will leave you to get settled, Elena. Arthur turned his face back toward the window. As we stepped out, Vivian handed me a printed schedule. Meals, mobility, support medication times, evening routine. The medications are the most important part, she said. He must take everything exactly as prescribed. If he misses a dose, the day becomes much harder to manage. Who oversees his treatment? I asked. She met my eyes for a brief moment. You do not need to worry about that. You only need to make sure he receives what has been prescribed. That answer should have bothered me more than it did. At the time, all I heard was structure, and structure felt like survival. A house manager showed me to a small bedroom on the second floor. Neat, clean, comfortable enough. Staff quarters made tasteful. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. If you hear arguments in this house, she said quietly, best not to repeat what you hear. Then she lowered her voice even more. And if Mr. Hensley seems different, sometimes do not rush to tell people. I frowned. Different how? She stepped back toward the hall. I did not say anything, she said, and left. The rest of the afternoon passed in careful, tense fragments. Arthur refused lunch, then demanded tea, then refused tea because I had brought it. He barked at a gardener through the window. He let me adjust the blanket once, then snapped at me for touching it. Every interaction felt like walking across ice that had not decided whether it was going to hold. By 9 that night, I was exhausted in the way only fresh humiliation and careful fear can exhaust a person. I went downstairs for water, because I knew if I stayed in my room any longer, I was going to start thinking about Daniel and the silence he had left behind him. The house was too quiet. Then I heard a man laughing. Not loudly, not far away. Just enough. I stopped in the hallway with one hand against the wall, because there are voices your body remembers before your mind catches up. I knew that voice. I stepped toward the glow coming from the sitting room, and saw a man standing near the bar with a glass in his hand. He turned. For one full second, the room went white around the edges. Daniel. My ex-husband stood in front of me in a navy sweater and tailored slacks, holding an amber drink and looking so perfectly at ease in that room that I understood everything all at once. Vivian. The mansion. Arthur. This was her house. Which meant I had just taken a job inside the home of the woman Daniel left me for. His smile spread slowly like he had been handed a gift he had not even known to ask for. Elena, he said. Well, this is a surprise. I could barely get the words out. I did not know this was your house. He took a sip from his glass. Not mine technically, but yes, I live here. I said nothing. He enjoyed that. I could see it in the way he leaned against the bar and looked me over, not with love or even regret, but with the lazy cruelty of someone admiring the difference between two versions of his life. Then he said the line that made it all even worse. So you are caring for my father-in-law now. The floor felt unsteady under me. I should go, I said. Go where? His voice stayed light. That was the part that hurt most. He was not angry. He was entertained. I repeated I should go. He stepped closer. You can, he said. Of course you can. It is a free country. I just would have thought by now, you would be choosing jobs a little more carefully. I kept my face still. He glanced around the room, then back at me. Let me guess. You needed the money badly enough that you stopped asking questions. I am here to work, I said. Exactly. He smiled again. That is what makes this so remarkable. 10 years ago, you were my wife. Tonight, you are the woman being paid to stop my father-in-law from throwing things. I turned away from him. He gave me one last push. Leave if you want. I mean it. But rent is still rent. And your son still has to eat. Children are inconvenient that way. I froze. There are wounds that reopen when the right person reaches into the right place. Daniel had always known where mine were. Then he lifted his glass slightly, like he was toasting the whole scene. Welcome to your new workplace, Elena. I made it upstairs without dropping the glass of water only because I do not think my hand could feel it anymore. Inside my room, I shut the door, set the glass down, and stood there staring at my suitcase. I could leave, I thought. I could zip it, carry it down the stairs, walk back through those iron gates, and never let any of them see me again. Then I pictured my son asking whether he was still going to school next month. Adults with children do not always get to fall apart in clean ways. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my phone, and looked at a picture of him missing one front tooth and smiling as if the world had never done anything cruel to anyone. If you were me that night, would you leave or stay one more day? I stayed. The next morning, Arthur looked at me with something close to surprise when I entered his room. You are still here, he said. Yes. He studied me for a moment. Then either you are very brave or very desperate. Maybe both, I said. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. More like recognition. The days that followed were a test of how much humiliation a person could swallow while pretending to be made of stone. Daniel made a point of appearing just often enough to remind me what my position was in that house. Once when I was carrying a tray into Arthur's room, Daniel passed me in the hall while Vivian stood 2 steps behind him. "Careful with that," he said. "Staff should never get sloppy." Another time, a guest visiting the estate paused when she saw me near the library. Daniel placed a hand on the back of a chair and said with a laugh too polished to call cruel at first hearing, "We go way back. Elena used to be my wife." The woman looked embarrassed for me. Daniel looked pleased with himself. Vivian was different. She did not taunt. She refined. "I hope your personal history is not affecting your work here," she said to me one afternoon while I prepared Arthur's lunch tray. I met her eyes. "I am doing my job. I expect that," she said. "Boundaries matter in this house." I almost laughed at that. "I understand boundaries very well," I told her. "I just do not forget who drew them." Her expression chilled by a fraction. "Good," she said and walked away. Meanwhile, Arthur began confusing me. He had moments, small ones, when the fog seemed to shift. He would ask for the newspaper and glance at the financial page before shoving it away. He would mutter the name of a fund manager under his breath. He would notice when staff changed the placement of things in the room. Once, while I was handing him a glass of water, he looked directly at me and said, "They look at me like they decided what I was before I opened my mouth." Then 10 minutes later he knocked the water onto the floor and shouted at the ceiling. The pattern was there, not clear enough to trust, clear enough to notice. Then the doctors came. 2 men in dark coats arrived just before noon, with leather cases and practiced expressions. Vivian brought them up herself. The door to Arthur's room stayed closed for nearly 40 minutes. When it opened again, Arthur was worse. Not just angry, slower, harsher. His speech thickened around the edges. His movements looked delayed, like instructions were reaching his body a second too late. By evening he was shouting at nothing. When I tried to calm him, he swept a glass from the table so hard it struck the side of my shoulder before shattering on the floor. Staff rushed in too quickly to be surprised. One of them went straight to the locked cabinet and pulled out a small medical case. Another held Arthur's arm, while the first prepared a syringe. "What is that?" I asked. "A sedative," one of the staff muttered without looking at me. "Do you do this often?" He would not answer. Arthur fought for a few seconds, then sagged as the medication took hold. His head tipped to one side. The room went quiet in the way rooms do, after something violent is forced into stillness. I stood there with glass dust at my feet and an ache spreading through my shoulder, and for the first time I thought, this is not care, this is management. That night I walked past the library on my way back upstairs and heard Vivian's voice through the cracked door. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. I could not hear every word, only pieces. The new dosage created exactly the response he expected, Vivian said. Daniel answered. "So how much longer?" A pause. "We still need more behavior on record before the next review," Vivian said. "But after that it gets easier." Daniel's voice sharpened. "I am not waiting forever while he still has signing authority. If this is not done before the end of the month, everything gets pushed again." Another pause. Then Vivian, calmer than he was. "It will be done." That was all I heard before footsteps shifted inside the room and I moved away. It was not a confession. It was worse. It was enough. The next morning, Arthur looked different. Not healthy. Not fully clear. But present in a way I had not seen yet. He waited until I had closed the door behind me. "Do not look at me like I am gone right now," he said quietly. "Look at me like I am running out of time." My pulse jumped. "I heard something last night," I said. His eyes stayed on mine. "Then you know. Not everything. Enough." He took a breath that seemed to cost him. "They do not need me dead," he said. "They need me stripped first." I did not speak. He kept going, but slowly, with effort. "If the next review goes the way she wants, I lose control. Financial, medical, all of it. If I believe you and I am wrong, I said, I lose the only job keeping my son fed. If you do not believe me and I am right," he replied, "I lose everything." Silence filled the room. Then I nodded once. "All right," I said. "Then we do not let that happen." That was the moment our alliance began. Not with some dramatic promise. Not with tears. Just with 2 tired people understanding exactly what the other stood to lose. I did not touch Arthur's medications. "I want that," said plainly. "I am not a doctor. I am not a nurse. And I was not stupid enough to hand Vivian a perfect defense by interfering with his treatment. What I did instead was watch. I wrote down every medication time. I noted how Arthur behaved before and after each dose. I recorded which days the private doctors came, and how quickly he worsened afterward. I photographed labels when I could without being seen. I sent those labels to a woman I knew through my aunt, a geriatric nurse practitioner who answered only after I promised I was not asking her to treat anyone. She called me that night. "I cannot diagnose from photos," she said. "But if those dosages are being used the way you describe, they could absolutely make an older man look slower, more confused, more volatile. Can they make him seem incapable?" A pause. "They could make him appear much worse than he is." That was enough to keep moving. Arthur, in the meantime, began having clearer windows. Not whole days. Never that. Moments. Then stretches. Then entire early mornings, where he could track a conversation, remember names, and speak in a straight line. During one of those windows, he gave me the name of his former attorney, Malcolm Reed. I contacted him from a number I borrowed from the house manager under a pretense I still feel guilty about. Malcolm did not believe me at first. Then I told him about the review, the drugs, Daniel's comment about signing authority before the end of the month. He went quiet. If Arthur Hensley is still having lucid intervals, he said, then they do not have him yet. What do? We do not move too early, he replied. If we move too early, they turn you into the problem. If we move at the right moment, they get trapped inside the paperwork they built. Within days, Malcolm had arranged for an independent specialist to review everything he legally could. I passed along the medication timeline, the dosage photos, the behavioral patterns, the dates of the private visits, and every detail I could remember from the hallway conversation. Arthur and I made one more choice after that. We kept performing. Whenever Vivian came into the room, Arthur gave her what she expected. He shouted. He gripped the armrest until his knuckles whitened. Once he threw a pillow so hard it hit the wardrobe. Another time, he stared at the wall and muttered what sounded like nonsense until Vivian left with a tight, satisfied look in her eyes. When she was gone, the room changed. He would breathe, blink hard, look at me and say things like, "Did she bring the blue folder in today?" Or "Gray?" Or "Daniel is pushing too fast. He is desperate." He was getting better at pretending to be worse. And that more than anything told me he was still there. Daniel grew bolder as the days passed. One evening he stopped in the doorway while I adjusted Arthur's blanket and said, "Not much longer now. Everything in this house is finally going to sit where it belongs." People who say that too early are usually the ones standing in the wrong place when the floor starts moving. When the whole house wants you small, do you disappear or stay long enough to see the truth? If you like revenge stories where the truth hits harder than money, subscribe and stay with me. By the third week, Malcolm had enough to act. Not enough to arrest anyone. Not enough to make headlines. Enough to break the review. That was all we needed. Vivian announced the meeting herself over breakfast in the formal dining room. Her tone was grave and noble, crafted for witnesses. "Tomorrow afternoon we will be holding a capacity review for my father," she said. "Medical and legal, so everyone involved can make responsible decisions going forward." Responsible. That word nearly made me laugh. The review would include Vivian's attorney, the private physician representatives from the Hensley family office Malcolm on Arthur's behalf, and the independent evaluator Malcolm had brought in. I would be present as Arthur's live-in caregiver because my daily observations formed part of the practical record. Daniel caught me alone in the hall afterward. "After tomorrow," he said quietly, "you are going to understand what it means to have no voice in this house." I looked at him. "I never thought I had one here," I said. That night Arthur asked me a question as I helped him prepare for bed. "If you want to walk away before tomorrow," he said, "I will not blame you." I straightened the blanket over his knees. "If I was going to walk away," I said, "I would have done it the first night." He held my gaze for a moment. "No," he said. "The first night you were desperate. Tomorrow you walk in by choice." I did not realize until then how much that mattered to me. The next afternoon, the review began in the smaller drawing room off the West Hall. Not a family gathering, not a casual discussion. A formal capacity review with documents, folders, signatures, and men who made money deciding whether other people could still decide for themselves. Vivian sat poised at one end of the long table in a dark green dress, grief and duty arranged carefully across her face. Daniel sat beside her, one ankle crossed over his knee, looking bored in the arrogant way of people who think an outcome has already been purchased. Arthur was wheeled in by me. He looked exactly the way they wanted him to look. Fragile, slower than the room, easy to dismiss. For a while everything moved according to Vivian's plan. Her attorney spoke first, summarizing concerns about Arthur's instability and progressive incapacity. The private physician described behavioral volatility, disorientation risk to self and others. Vivian added personal observations with the soft pain of a devoted daughter making a hard but necessary choice. I stood behind Arthur's chair and let them build their version of him in the air. Then Malcolm set down his pen. "Before we proceed further," he said, "there are material issues with the assumptions underlying today's review." Vivian turned her head slowly. "I am sorry." Malcolm did not look at her. "You heard me." The private physician stiffened. "On what basis?" "On the basis of medication records, independent evaluation, observed behavioral timing, and evidence suggesting Mr. Hensley has been maintained in a state that materially distorts how his functional capacity is being represented." Daniel leaned forward. "That is absurd." Malcolm opened a folder. "Is it?" Then Arthur sat up. Not dramatically. Not like a miracle in a movie. Just slowly, steadily, as if he had been carrying his own weight in secret and had finally decided to let the room see it. His voice when it came was rough but clear. "I do not think my daughter needs to finish that sentence for me, Vivian." Silence hit the room so hard it felt physical. Vivian stared at him. "Father." "No," Arthur said. "Today you listen. For the first time since I had entered that estate, Vivian truly lost control of her face. Malcolm began laying it out piece by piece. Medication logs, dosage inconsistencies, behavioral escalation, following specific visits. The independent specialist's opinion that Arthur had been rendered artificially more impaired in presentation than his underlying condition justified. My written timeline. The dates of doctor visits, the exact hours of subsequent decline, the comments Daniel made regarding signing authority before the end of the month. Not one perfect smoking gun. Something better. A web. The private physician started objecting. Malcolm cut him off. "We are not here to debate tone," he said. "We are here with evidence that Mr. Hensley's apparent incapacity has been shaped, prolonged, and leveraged in ways that call this entire review into question." Vivian looked at me then, not as staff but as a threat. "She is a caregiver," she said sharply. "She has no standing to interpret any of this." Arthur answered before Malcolm could. "I am not placing my future in her hands," he said. "I am placing it in the truth, and in this house that is the thing you have worked hardest not to see." Daniel spoke next too quickly. "I was trying to protect this family." Arthur turned toward him with a contempt so complete it almost sounded tired. "Family," he said. "You entered this family through a marriage certificate, and the first thing you did was count how many days remained before I lost signing authority." Daniel's face changed. Not anger, exposure. Malcolm slid another page across the table to the family office representative. "We also have statements and timeline support regarding pressure related to a pending capital release that required Mr. Hensley's authority before month-end," he said. "Which gives Mr. Hayes here a rather obvious motive for urgency." Daniel stood halfway up. "This is ridiculous." Arthur did not raise his voice. "I thought at minimum you would know shame," he said. "Turns out all you know is how to wait for an old man to weaken so you can touch what you did not build." Vivian tried one last time. "Father, this woman has manipulated you." Arthur's answer was cold enough to freeze the room. "No. She stayed when there was no reason for her to stay. You stayed because there were signatures left to take. If the people who ruined your life were finally exposed in their own house, would you speak one more time or let the truth do the rest?" I chose one sentence. Daniel looked at me across that table, and for the first time since our divorce, he did not look taller than me. He looked smaller, meaner, emptier. "You did all this for revenge," he said. I shook my head. "No. I did this because for the first time in that house, someone needed saving more than your pride did." That was enough. The review was suspended on the spot. The family office representative withdrew recognition of the proceeding pending formal investigation. Malcolm demanded immediate transfer of medication control and care oversight away from Vivian's authority. The independent physician requested preservation of all medical records and treatment directives for legal review. The private doctor was ordered to surrender documentation related to dosage and instruction history. Vivian did not cry. She did worse. She stood there with her mouth slightly open, unable to force dignity back into a scene that had already rejected her. Daniel kept trying to speak, but every sentence sounded thinner than the last. No one was handcuffed that afternoon. Real life is often slower than fantasy, but their power broke in real time, which in some ways is better. By evening, Vivian no longer controlled Arthur's medication access. Daniel no longer had a path to the authority he had been circling like a scavenger. Malcolm had filed emergency protections. The official investigations would come after. The collapse had already begun. Later that night, after the lawyers left, and the house settled into a different kind of silence, Arthur asked me to wheel him into the library. He looked exhausted, not triumphant, just relieved in the deep, aching way people look when they have been holding a door shut with their own body and finally get help. "You came here to survive," he said. "Yes. But you stayed because you would not watch another person be stripped down in front of you," he said. I said nothing. He looked at the fire, then back at me. "Those are not the same thing." "No," I admitted. "They are not." He nodded. "I have arranged 3 things," he said. "There will be an educational trust established for your son by the end of the week. You and your boy will move into the carriage house for as long as you need until you decide what comes next. And if you are willing, I want you to remain here in a formal role, not as staff people look through, as my patient advocate, and as part of the team that makes sure no one ever gets that close to my life again." I stared at him. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes, only if you mean it," he said. I laughed then softly because that was the first truly simple thing anyone had offered me in a month. "Yes," I said. "I mean it." He gave one small nod. "Good." Then he said the line I carried with me long after the investigation started, long after Daniel and Vivian became names people said carefully, in legal conversations, instead of names that could still wound me in private. "Money can buy obedience, Elena," he said. "It cannot buy the right person standing beside you at the right time." When I first drove through those gates, I thought I was entering the place where my humiliation would become permanent. On that first night when I heard Daniel's voice in the dark and turned to find him standing there like the lord of a new life built on the ruins of mine, I thought that was the shock. I was wrong again. The real shock was discovering that he had not taken as much from me as I thought. He took 10 years. He took comfort. He took the version of my life that depended on him. But he did not take my ability to see clearly. He did not take my instinct to protect someone standing on the edge of being erased. And he did not get to decide who I was after he left. I walked into that house because I needed money to feed my child. I walked out of that version of my life with something worth more. I was no longer living inside a story Daniel had written about me. If you like smart revenge stories where quiet truth hits harder than power, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.